I feel like that's a way of saying, okay, Lord, I am coming to you exactly as I am. I'm not trying to fake it in front of you. I am telling you that I am struggling with the perfectionism. I'm struggling with the chaos. I'm struggling with the mess. I'm struggling with even just if you're the kind of person who is going to bark at somebody because they left a coffee cup in the sink or whatever, even to take that before the Lord, that becomes a pleasing and honoring sacrifice to Him. I mean, that's just you saying, I am human, Lord, and I cannot do this on my own.
You're listening to Altered Stories with Michelle Renee Gutch.
Hello, Altered Stories show listeners, and welcome to my season 4, episode 154, featuring my lovely special guest here, Whitney English, who is sharing her From Chaos to Called God story. And this is your chief storyteller host, Michelle Saunders Gutch. And thank you for listening and watching my show that helps Christian women like Whitney share their God stories so women around the world can hear them and never feel alone. And friends, if one of our stories has blessed you, do bless us by subscribing to our show and sharing this episode. Or you are always welcome to bless us financially with a donation. And you can do that on our website at www.alteredstories.org. Friends, I also hope all is well and you're enjoying listening to all the God stories being shared. If there is one that has made a difference in your life, I'd love to know about it. So if you do leave us a review, you can receive a free downloadable copy of my 52-week devotional that features my top 52 episodes. Now, let's get this show started. I'm excited to bring to the mic my special guest here, Whitney English, who is referred by Front Gate Media. And friends, I'm going to say a few words about her, and then I know she'll be sharing a lot more. She's an author, speaker, and has a degree in interior design and studied management at Parsons in New York City. And her work has been featured in O Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and on the Today Show twice. She has been featured as one of Country Living's magazine's women entrepreneurs. Wow, that's amazing. And one of her favorite dreams come true is her husband, David, and their 3 children. And that's awesome. So welcome to the show. Whitney, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Michelle, so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Well, our guests are going to love that. And I love talking to you in the short time that we talked about. So do tell us a little bit more about who you are. Maybe you can chat about your soon-to-be launched book and also share with us why our homes tell our stories. We get the audience kind of revved up here.
hmm I love home. I'll start by talking about that. I'm an author and an artist. My next book is launching on April 29th. It's called Organize First, Decorate Second. We can talk more about that over the course of the show, but it's my second book. I wanted to write a book about home. And not just because home is a beautiful place or can be a beautiful place from an external standpoint, but also because home very much defines who we are. And as a wife and a mom, I realize that I am not just creating a place that needs to look nice, because sometimes it doesn't, to be completely honest, but it needs to function in a way that nurtures my family and my kids. And it needs to, home just, it speaks to my soul. And I wanted to write to explore those ideas around home. So
Yes.
that's the short version.
Whoa. Well, home is where the heart is. And
Hmm.
I can tell you right now, there's something very special about that, in my opinion. And I know women love to nest. They
Hmm.
just, many have had a lot of trauma or come through a lot of trauma. And it's interesting how your home can reflect the trauma you've come out of or the trauma you've come through or going through. So it does definitely tell our stories. And you and I spoke because you're going to share a little bit about your personal story around, what brought you to where you are in your journey. But I would love to hear from you. Why do you think women should tell their stories? Why do you think it's so important to do that?
I I am passionate about I'm passionate about home and I am passionate about storytelling, which is I've always loved to write, but I never considered myself a storyteller until recently. I guess I felt like I just didn't know enough, like who am I to think that I know how to weave a tale or and now I
Yeah.
realize that story is important, I think, first and foremost, because that is how God has communicated with us since the beginning of time. When we look back at the Old Testament, I'm in a Bible class right now. It's a 4-year class. It's not a seminary class, that we are starting in the Old Testament and just we have different commentaries that we're
Mhm.
reading to support our study, that we meet once a week, and we're in the Old Testament, which honestly, I don't know that I've ever, outside of maybe Bible stories whenever I was in Sunday school, whenever I was a kid. I don't know that we spend a lot of time in the Old Testament as adults. I think, we if we're looking for answers on how to live a Christian life, thank you, Apostle Paul, for
Yes.
everything you recorded or he recorded. But uh I so we're talking about the Old Testament, and it's so fascinating and gruesome and sordid. And I mean, there's just a lot in the Old Testament that if you read it without the context of this overarching narrative that God is telling us, if you read it without that, it'll throw you for a loop. I mean, um there's we were talking about Joshua and Judges on Monday night, and one of the gals spoke up and she's just like, how it, and we're very with each other. She was like, how is it that a loving God is supposed to be seen through these crazy stories of Israelites wandering the desert? And I mean, it's a fair question. And but I do think
Yeah.
that when we zoom out and we look at the overarching narrative, so one of the things that really helped me understand story, and I will share this with your audience in the hopes that it might help them as well, is that a story is really 5 simple things. It's a character who has a problem, who needs a guide, who has a
Hmm.
plan that results in success or failure. I got that line full, like, to give credit where credit is due, from my friend Donald Miller, who is an author, New York Times bestselling author. But when I learned that, once he taught me that, I started to be able to step back from my own life and look for those things. And when you find those things, you find the story. And then what I realized is when you find the story, you can kind of figure out, you kind of can start to pick up on some clues about what God is doing in the world around us, who is the ultimate guide. There are other things that story has to include. Story has to include conflict.
Hmm.
God did not create sin, but did allow, he did give us free will and the opportunity to make choices in our life. And that
Hmm.
brings in an element of tension that keeps us engaged in the story. So I've also been able to, story has helped me understand that I don't have to look at the conflict in my life, the struggle, as a
Hmm.
bad thing. I can look at that as a sign that God is at work in my life. So back to even your point
Yep.
about some of us come from homes with trauma and things like that. That is one thing that I don't think I use the word trauma in the book, but and I was also very careful about the stories I told in the book because
Yeah.
there are people still alive. You have to be careful about those things. But I wanted to let people know that even if you didn't grow up in a home that met all your needs, that doesn't mean that yeah, I'm looking for words here, but it doesn't mean you're not alone. It doesn't mean it's without hope. It doesn't mean that you can't create that home for yourself or your family, your children,
Yeah.
your grandchildren. It doesn't mean that you do not have the choice and the agency to start making decisions today that can
Mhm.
change that for future generations. So that is a bunch of answers to that question
That's, I
all in
mean,
one. But
it's fabulous that you would bring in the background there, though, around the actual details of what encompasses a story, because there is a lot involved in that. And the Old Testament, oh my gosh, I agree with you totally. Um, it's a it's important to understand the Old Testament because that's what's brought us forward to the New Testament, right? And there was so much to be gleaned before Christ died on the cross and Jesus was there and all of that. I mean, and the stories that come out of that, I'm thinking of too, like King David, and right now that's right out there on Prime Video. And, you're what it's such a cool thing to watch. How people that are directing and producing that, um, it's so, I mean, it just brings to life everything that King David, went through and the whole history and background around it, even from a biblical standpoint, but bringing in a little bit of drama. So anyway, I love the conversation we're having and what you shared about that because I think we don't always get that kind of answer in that in-depth way. So I appreciate that. So moving into your story now, this is a great segue. You know, why don't you share for us, Whitney, where you're from chaos to God, your God story there from chaos to called, God's story began. I know there was a lot more involved in that, but we would love to hear just kind of where that started to bring you to where you are in your calling. And I love what you're doing anyway. Thank you.
sure, thank you. Yes. So when I wrote my first book, I talked a lot about some struggles that I experienced as a young entrepreneur. I started my first business when I was 22. And I've done podcast interviews before. If people want to hear that story, search Whitney English. I'm sure they can find versions of it out
There's a
there.
lot up there. Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I had not really talked about my some of the older stories, some of it. And so in this book, I went back and I say in the book, I grew up in a museum. It was, I think I quote Ferris Bueller, Cameron and Ferris Bueller when he's, or when they're talking, describing where Cameron is from in Ferris Bueller, and it's very cold and it's very sterile and it feels like a museum. I mean, that is, we had, my mom was a museum curator, an antique dealer, a decorator in her own right, and things needed to be just so. I've come to recognize that as generational trauma. And I think we can all look at our parents and give them credit and say, you guys did the best you could do with what you had. But if I know better, I need to do better. And this is something I do not want to pass on to my kids. And we
Yeah.
can just very easily look at the state of the world today and say they're going to have enough to deal with without having to worry
Oh,
about
yeah.
how if the vacuum cleaner lines are all going the right direction on the carpet. I
Yeah. Oh, oh, different set of stress.
Right. It was a different time, and I really do give my parents a lot of credit for. I mean, they were as perfect as they ran the house, as perfectly as they ran the house. They were also trying to raise perfect children. I mean, well, that's completely impossible to do. I
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from, and I empathize with that challenge, and I think they met it head on. and really
Yeah.
did an awesome job. Um, but there, like everyone's childhood, there are things that you carry with you that, and for me, that thing was just, I am not going to live up to that perfectionism. I am a
Yeah.
creative person. I was a creative kid. And the tensions that that created in our house were awful. It was, and then when you have a teenager, you've got someone trying to find themselves. So here I am, this creative kid trying to express my creativity in whatever convoluted way a teenager knows how
Yeah.
to express it. That sort of like creates this almost inner child dialogue against a parent, a parental voice that, the parental voice is saying, pick up your shoes. And the teenager is saying, I don't want to pick up my shoes. I want to have control over my life. So I'm going to do what I want to do. And I mean, isn't
Yep.
that just life in general? Like, I
Yes.
mean, that isn't a perfect illustration of sometimes how we respond to God, and the Lord. And if he is going to be Lord of our lives, and he's saying, pick up our shoes, and we're going, I don't want to pick up my shoes, God. We're in the story. That is the tension. We have identified the conflict, and now we can engage and make choices from there by consciously acknowledging this, what happened, without casting blame. I want to be careful about that in this story. Um, what can I do in my home to create a different environment that's going to nurture my children to be the best versions of themselves they can possibly be, so that we can perpetuate this idea of using the gifts God has given us to bless those around us, to glorify Him, to to share with our community what He's doing in our lives. I mean, really, to bring glory to Him. That's the ultimate goal. But we have to figure out as humans how to do that in a very messy middle.
Yes. I love that. I love that. A very messy middle.
Yes. I mean, really, that's my heart behind the book is you've got this, I have this really creative brain, and I'm constantly trying to figure out what do I do with that gift, and how do I take that to the world. So how it has looked in our family's life is, and this is what I talk about in the book, different routines, different systems. It's season systems, rituals, and routines. I
Hmm.
talk a lot about in the book. It's not, the book is called Organize First, Decorate Second, which
Right.
really just came from me puttering around the house, probably one day trying to decorate and make things look pretty. And I thought to myself, this isn't working. You have to organize first and then you can decorate.
Yeah.
Lipstick on a pig is still lipstick on a pig. So, but more important than the way things look, and you alluded to this in the beginning when you said our homes can be, I'm paraphrasing, but our homes are external representations of an internal state.
Yeah, you see that a lot.
Yes. And I'm very conscious of that. But there's still a certain way to go about fixing that. Right now,
Hmm.
before we started recording, I mentioned that the room I'm sitting in is halfway remodeled. And on the
I
surface,
know
it looks
it's
good. You're
amazing. I
you're
love
seeing,
it.
yeah. So you've got wallpaper and curtains and things like that. But we also have, the ceiling is unfinished. You probably, can't
I
exactly
didn't
tell that
zero
from
in
the
on
video.
that at all.
You're right.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
There's the countertops are outdated. It's, they're 1994 countertops. Who cares? It's um but there's a certain order. When we moved into this house, it was 2020, so we were mid-pandemic, where everybody's
Yeah.
rushing around trying to relocate and figure out what to do. We came from a very small, almost zero lot line house, and all of a sudden we had five members of our family trying to work and study. And I mean, we were crammed on top of each other, and it wasn't sustainable. So we found this house. It hadn't been remodeled I mean, 50 years old, and really, I think
Yeah.
they did kind of a remodel in the 90s, but um, we were really determined to get in as fast as we could, and and we didn't organize. I mean, I don't really go into quite this much depth about the circumstances in the book, but we thought we could just paint and refinish some floors and we could move in. And once we got in, we realized there was bad plumbing.
Hmm.
There, were some structural issues that probably
Yeah.
had been here since it was built in the 70s. So we've kind of had to rewind. We're on a septic system. We ended up having to put in a completely new septic tank, so that was really kind of the nail in the coffin that
Yeah.
halted us mid remodel. Just we ran into a lot of problems because we didn't organize first. We
Right.
we really, really pushed the situation. And you know what? If you have a ton of money to throw at a house and you can
Yeah.
just
Deep
you can
pockets.
you can go about it chaotically. It's very
Right.
possible to do that, but but we don't have a ton of money
Right.
to throw at a
Right.
house. And so I realize even right now, even as I'm talking to you, our yard, we're on 2 acres, which is
Uh-huh.
a lot more to take care of than we realized. And again, if you have the money to buy tulip bulbs every season,
Yeah.
you can overcome a lot of weeds. But
Right.
we're having to be a lot more resourceful about that. I don't mind that at all. That is part of, I think, why God has blessed me with that gift of creativity is it allows you to practice that resourcefulness and say, okay,
Right.
Lord, you've given me everything I need to manage this. It might not
Yeah.
look the way I want it to look. It might not look like a Pinterest board. It might not look the way Instagram wants it to look. That doesn't matter. I really believe that um, just facing that challenge head on, even when days when it's so hard. And I'm talking about landscaping, but listeners might be thinking of other challenges that,
Right.
I think we all have these days where we are sitting in bed and it's just all we can do to get out and face face whatever the day holds.
Right.
Um, and so right now, our landscape looks terrible, but it is an external representation of where we are. There are
Yeah.
some people who would probably look at that and say, man, they really have a weed problem. Um, but we look at it and we're aware of the weeds, but we're also aware of the constraints of time and money. And you'll see us out there pulling weeds,
Uh-huh.
even if we don't get all of them at one time, So I think that that's part of the whole process of we want to just get there right away, that God wants to do this work inside of us. And, when we talk about organizing things, we're talking about organizing this stuff in a drawer. I mean, we're talking about the inner workings of something.
Right.
The surface tends to be the deck, and I do believe that the surface matters as well. But it's just a process to get there.
Yes.
You're not gonna get there over time, and you're never gonna fully get there. A drawer will be organized for a little bit, and then if you do not maintain that order, you are
Oh, God.
right
Yes.
back in the thick of it. And it's just such a metaphor for life
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
how and our homes evolve with us and become representations of who we are and where we are and what we're learning and how we're tackling those problems. And no matter what it looks like on the outside, I think that there is a wonderful opportunity for, I'm going to use the word pride, but you know what I mean. Not when I say take pride, I don't mean be arrogant that, but despite the fact that we have weeds in our front yard, I am proud of the progress that we have made on cleaning up 2 acres. And, we may not be there yet. And I don't mean pride, and I mean quiet confidence pride is what I
Yeah.
mean. And,
Yeah.
God is at work in our lives, and you will see progress on the weeds in our yard until
Well, I
but
also
then.
think that we got to give each other grace, and people need to give other people grace and understanding, right?
Hmm.
That God gives us grace because He's cleaning us up.
Hmm.
It's a work, we are a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
So, your story and what you've said is, you've talked about where you came from, where
Hmm.
you are, how you view things, where you're growing, and
Hmm.
changing in that space to, your calling in what God
Hmm.
is doing in your life and how He's using you, um, and how your book is also a tool for others. So I think that is, in my opinion, um, a representative of how God took your chaos, right? And how He is using it for, and how you are, um, in in the story glorifying God through that too. So, you know what? I think it's a work in progress. It's a journey, and we all have to go through that kind of, chaotic. I think it can be chaotic at times, right? I mean, my daughter, she has, a piece of property and a home, and they are trying to get it to where they wanted to be. And it was a lot to get it to where it is now. And
Hmm.
every kind of change that you make in your life, and even in a new home, you still have to find, you know, some kind of organization to get to where you need to be with the
Right.
actual, getting the decor and everything
Right.
together. So I I think there's a lot to the story, actually.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I was
any
going to say,
any other words? Because I know there's probably more to your book and everything.
yes.
So
Yeah. I was just going to speak to your response and, and talk about that idea of chaos. And
good.
when in Genesis, when it says that the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering on the waters. The ancient Hebrew formless and void, I'm going to butcher this, but it's tohu va. I shouldn't even try. to, tohu va vahu. So, and it means primordial, swirling, meaningless chaos. The formless and
Mhm.
void was the chaos out of which God created the world. And he is a God of order. He is a God of
Yes.
creation. He
Hmm.
so in many ways, our home is just the storyline is just absolutely parallel with the opening books of the opening book of the Bible, Genesis. Just this idea of it, we're going to start from a place of chaos, and we're trying to move to a place of order through the challenges that he's facing us. This is part of the refinement that he's pulling us through to, create us in his, well, we are created in his image, but to turn us into the people he designed us to be, to finish
Right.
the masterpiece. And the what I love about the phrase "from chaos to called," and we came up with that when you said we need the title for your story. So
Yeah.
it's a line
Yeah.
I really really love, but it's not actually in the book. But it's this idea of it's not from chaos to perfection or from chaos to finally finished or from chaos to it's just called. I mean, it's from chaos to call. We are called from the mess, as C.S. Lewis would talk about very often in his writings, further up and further in.
Hmm.
And I do wish we gave each other more grace. One of the things I say to my kids is in our house you get points for effort. You don't I tell them you don't get points for effort in the real world. Like when your boss
Hmm.
is going to tell you to do something and deliver it, you don't get points for trying. You're going to
You
have to,
deliver.
right. You're going to have to meet that deadline. But right now, where they are, I want them to know that our home is a place where it is okay to be imperfect. It is okay to be flawed. And we can try. We could, and we'll do funny, weird, crazy family things. Like my husband and I have stood in front of my children and parodied Mrs. Doubtfire. We have parodied Mary Poppins. We've parodied Nanny McPhee. We anything to get them engaged in the idea of tidying. Um, and they sit there. I mean, now they're 15, 14, and 12, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, it's so awkward. I can't believe you're doing this. Like, but you're remembering, you won't forget that we asked you to unload the dishwasher and load it again because we made it so goofy and awkward, you know. Um, and we're not afraid to be ourselves. We're not afraid to be goofy and raw and try something new. And so that's part of the culture that we're
Yeah.
creating in our home and part of the story too.
Yeah. Well, I love that because I think there's some authenticity coming through from
Hmm.
what you're saying and perfection. There's a lot of perfectionists for
Hmm.
perfectionism. I
Hmm.
meant to say, I'm an example of that. My daughter's a perfectionist. My dad was. I mean, it's kind of a
Hmm.
generational thing. Not healthy all the time. So we need people that, you know, are saying, hey, it's okay. We're still going to love you if maybe things aren't always perfect, you know?
Right.
And I don't think God ever intended us to be like that either.
Yeah.
So, because it can get really unhealthy and you can get all bound up. And so I love the organizational aspect of
Hmm.
what you're saying. And then, that whole piece of it's okay to be messy at times, you know. You can be organizationally messy. I'm assuming, maybe you
Yes.
can help me understand a little bit more of what your framework around that um, for those that, you know,
Right.
are trying to figure that all out, or they've come from those
Right.
kind of backgrounds where you had a mom that you got to do this just,
Hmm.
right.
And so well, okay. So I think that a couple things, if someone's listening and feeling that, I get there are a couple things I want to acknowledge. The the first one is just to say, I see you, I hear you, I am with you. I mean, I don't even have my phone sitting with me, but I want to just take a picture of the clutter on the tabletop beside me so that people can realize that this is okay, you know? Is it perfectly organized? No. But that's an ambition. And that's a worthy ambition. That is, I think anytime we acknowledge our humanity, we are saying we acknowledge our lack of our desire to be a perfectionist or our lack of perfection. I feel like that is a sacrifice. And theologians fact check me, but I feel like that's a way of saying, okay, Lord, I am coming to you exactly as I am. I'm not trying to fake it in front of you. I am telling you that I am struggling with the perfectionism. I'm struggling with the chaos. I'm struggling with the mess. I'm struggling with even just if you're the kind of person who is going to bark at somebody because they left a coffee cup in the sink or whatever, even to take that before the Lord, that becomes a pleasing and honoring sacrifice to Him. I
Yeah.
mean, that's
Yeah.
just you saying, I am human, Lord, and I cannot do this on my own. And in doing that, we we are subjecting ourselves to His lordship, and we're saying, I can't do this on my own. By the power of the Holy Spirit in me, help me tackle this problem. And His answer to us is going to meet us where we are. I mean, that's the beauty of the Holy Spirit. So your struggle is not going to be my struggle, and His response to us bringing those struggles to Him is going to be different to each of us. And He might say, okay, Whitney, I just want you to spend 5 minutes tidying up this space when you get off this call. And He might say to you, I want, or let's use you as an example, but say somebody just barked at their daughter for leaving the coffee cup. Maybe He wants that person to go apologize and say, listen, Susie Q, I'm sorry that I barked at you about the coffee cup in the sink. Can we, you know, and the healing that can provide, and the shifts. I mean, tiniest little shifts that you might have heard the metaphor about. How do you get to the moon? It's 1,000 little mid-course corrections.
Mhm.
You it's 2-degree shifts, And if we're aiming for the moon and we're 2 degrees off, we're going to end up on some star instead of the moon. Because by the time we leave where we are, that 2 degrees becomes 10 degrees off, and then it becomes 20 degrees off, and then it becomes, until we're just so far away from the goal that we set out to achieve. And so it's a constant daily tug of war. And I actually used that metaphor with one of my kids the other day. I was trying to explain some financial concepts because that's another area of stewardship that can be hard
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
creative people to maintain. And it's important to me that we at least have those conversations about it, even if I'm not giving them the perfect answers or the right solutions to this is how you manage your money or things like that. But I said, listen, it's like you're at one end of a rope and I'm at the other end of a rope. And we're going to both pick up the ends of that rope. This is a tug of war. And I'm standing over here holding one end of the rope, pulling on it, going, I have something to teach you. So you have to pick up the other end of the rope. And that tension is then created and I can pull you. I can't pull you if frankly, I was like, if you're not creating the tension on the other end. And there was a lot of tension in this conversation, believe me. But I was also trying to let him know that tension's not bad, like just because we're fighting about it, air quotes, fighting about it, um, isn't, there's nothing shameful about that. There's nothing shameful about barking at Susie Q that she left her coffee cup in the sink. I feel like what we need to be more aware of is that we have the ability to recognize that tension and respond to it in a way that glorifies the Lord.
Oh,
That
I
tension
love
is
that.
always going to be there. That's
So
sin in our
good.
lives.
Yeah.
But it's how we choose to respond. It is that we have the ability to respond, responsibility. We have the ability and responsibility to respond in a way that God has given us all the instructions for in his book. It might not be easy. It might get really complicated. You might be confused. I love that in the prayer that we prayed before
Mm-hmm.
starting this,
Mm-hmm.
Michael prayed that the spirit of confusion would be bound up. And I think that that would actually be for anybody who feels like they're struggling with chaos in their home. Let's just borrow those words from that prayer and say, let's bind up the chaos in our home and cast that out because you're a God of order. And I might be a very flawed, very human person, as Paul said, so that I might boast in my weakness. Um, I am not an organized person, but not naturally organized. But if I turn the struggle over to the Lord, if I recognize that tension and say, okay, this opportunity for you to get glory in my life, I don't know how. It's not really my job to figure out how he's going to do that work. It's just my
Right.
job to get up and say, okay, I'm holding the other end of this rope. There's tension here. How am I supposed to respond to this? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. And I love how you bring this all back to however you respond, whatever you're trying to come through, or how you're trying to bring peace out of, chaos, or getting to a place of where God is glorified. It's all about our dependence on God there,
Mm-hmm.
especially, as a believer in what we do in our journey, right? Here, as we continue to do the work that God has called us to do. And I, I think what your message is for those that maybe are so bound up and so full of shame or coming out of these hard places, that give God gives us grace. There's, put it
Mm-hmm.
our struggles out there for him to help us. And he uses resources and people like
Mm-hmm.
yourself, right? To help people heal through the process. So this has been a wonderful conversation, Whitney. And, you know, I would love to give you a little opportunity here before we wrap up to just, share details a little bit about how you can be reached and, any closing words. We will have this out in our interview and discussion here on our YouTube channel and all of the audio pieces of our podcast. And then we want to honor you and get a beautiful place on our website for promoting what you're doing. And God is using you through all those wonderful things that you're doing. So we will have that out there. But yeah, do tell us any last words and things.
Thank you for asking that. That's very sweet. So people can find me on Instagram at Whitney English. They can order the book on our website if they go to whitneyenglish.com. Actually, you can go to Organize First, Decorate Second, and it will also take you directly to the place where you can pre-order the book. The book comes out on April 29th. If people pre-order the book before April 29th, you can actually go, even if you already have pre-ordered the book, you can go to organizefirstdecoratesecond.com and fill out a form, and we will send you some PDF freebies, some
Awesome.
resources that you can use as you read through the book. So I'm really excited about those. You get some goofy videos of me decluttering spots around my house. And then another place that they can find me is Substack, which I am really, really loving. I'm really loving. It feels like a early Twitter before Twitter became all the things that we don't like about it.
Yeah.
So so over there, I'm at Whitney English, but I would also I would love to take the opportunity to encourage anyone listening. I feel like a lot of this conversation I do feel like this conversation is going to encourage your listeners. I feel that that prayer Michael prayed at the beginning of this was just amazing. So I just want to tell them that you might not be where you want to be, but you are where you're called to be. And if you're listening to this, I want to speak mercy and grace and blessings and favor all over your life, that you'll be able to turn off this podcast and go do something that God's calling you to do.
Well, awesome. So thank you again, Whitney, for being our guest and blessing our listeners all over the world. We are in almost 80 countries now, and I think order is needed. Any kind of perfectionism and healthy and all those things are necessary no matter where you live. So I think that's a cool thing, is I think we can apply this all over the world. So now, friends, it's time to hear a mental health tip from our ministry partner and licensed mental health counselor, Sherry Puckett.
Hello, friends. This is Sherry Puckett, licensed professional counselor. And today I want to talk about mirror neurons and forgiveness. So just as a reminder, mirror neurons are these neurons in your brain which take snapshots of your environment as you are growing up as a child and throughout your life, actually. And so, for example, if a little boy sees his dad, putting on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and going out and mowing the grass, that little kid is going to want his own little mower, and he's going to imitate his dad mowing the grass. Or a little girl may see, oh, it's Christmas time. That means we have to set the table and we have to make cookies, and mom always wore this apron. And so that little girl more than likely is going to want to imitate her mother. Now, whether or not you actually imitate your parent is not the point, but the point is that those mirror neurons take snapshots of your environment, and oftentimes they define you. And so the Bible, interesting enough, says in 2 Corinthians 3:18, but we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of God, are being transformed into that image. And so God invites us to create new neural pathways with our brain and take new snapshots of his glory so that we have the ability to imitate him. And so I'm going to tie that to forgiveness. Oftentimes we feel like, I can never forgive that person. This person was cruel to me. This person was abusive to me. And your feelings are valid. So let me just start off by saying that God himself brings healing to the brokenhearted, the word of God says. And so your feelings are absolutely valid, and God cares for you. He's compassionate to you. But he also tells us that we must forgive. Now, sometimes people think forgiveness means that it never happened. I just pretend like I was never hurt and I'm in good relationship with that person. But that's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness basically says that I know that God has forgiven me, and I am an imitator of my beautiful Jesus, which means that I am going to forgive that person. Now, your heart may still be broken, your heart may still be wounded, but you make the decision to be an imitator of Jesus. And this is so important. Colossians 3:13 says that we are bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. Now you may think, okay, I'm going to go ahead and make the decision to forgive. But what am I getting out of it? I feel like I've been shortchanged. I feel like there's no justice. Let me tell you this. That is how healing happens. And that is how you experience freedom. Jesus forgave even those that nailed him to the cross. And he absolutely experienced the pain and the suffering and everything. But what was his reward? We are his reward, my friends. God did it because of his great love for us, and because he forgave us, now we have fellowship with him. So here it is. When you forgive someone that has hurt you, you are imitating Jesus, and now you are free to have this deep, intimate relationship with Jesus. He's the prize, and you're also free from destruction. So abuse and all of these things are very painful, but when you forgive, you are literally taking the chains off of your ankles, off of your arms, off of your heart, off of your mind, off of your life, and you are free from that person. You are free to be everything that God has created you to be. So I hope you will join me on this journey of forgiveness so that we receive the prize of intimacy with our God. All right, I hope that helps, and I'll see you next time.
Until the next show, friends, be heard and be healed.
Altered Stories Ministry is a faith-based, nonprofit, and women's evangelistic storytelling ministry. If you enjoyed listening to today's story, your family and friends would probably benefit from hearing how God works in the lives of women all over the world, too. So please, subscribe to our show and share the link to this podcast. Share it on your social media. We also welcome your valued feedback on our stories. Also, we'd appreciate your prayerful consideration in sponsoring one of our future God-glorifying stories, and welcome your tax-exempt financial donation. To find out more on how you can support our ministry, you can log on to our website at www.alteredstories.org.